1 hour into the funeral, while guests were still offering condolences, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A lawyer's voice whispered, sounding like he was hiding in his own office. "Do not go home. Do not trust anyone who shares your last name." I turned to see a figure blocking the church doorway. Still as a statue, the way they looked at me made it clear this funeral was not over. It had just begun. My name is Maris DeWitt, and up until 1 hour ago, I was just a grieving granddaughter standing in the humid heat of a South Carolina afternoon. I am 34 years old enough to know that funerals are rarely about the dead and almost always about the living. But as I stood by the open grave of Harlan DeWitt, watching the mahogany casket lower into the dark earth of Harbor Point, I did not realize that the performance taking place around me was hiding a crime. The air smelled of salt and dying lilies. My mother, Celeste, was weeping into a lace handkerchief that probably cost more than my first car. My father, Warren, stood with his hand on her shoulder, looking stoic and respectable, the perfect picture of the grieving son-in-law. And then there was my younger brother, Brent, shifting his weight in a suit that was tailored too tight, checking his watch every 5 minutes as if grief were a meeting that was running overtime. I felt like a stranger in my own bloodline. I had not cried yet. My grief was a hard, cold knot in my chest, something private that I refused to share with these people who had spent the last decade waiting for Harlan to die. I reached into the deep pocket of my black dress coat, and my fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a small brass key. It was not a house key, and it certainly was not a car key. It looked like something that belonged to a different century. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me, sharp and clear. It was 3 months ago. The hospice nurses had stepped out for a shift change. Harlan had grabbed my wrist with a strength that shocked me. His skin was like parchment paper, translucent and fragile, but his grip was iron. He pressed the key into my palm, his blue eyes wide and lucid, stripping away the fog of medication for 10 seconds of absolute clarity. "Keep it hidden, Maris," he had rasped. "When the time comes, you will know what to open." That was it. He never spoke of it again. For 90 days, I had carried it, a heavy secret in a family that thrived on them. The service ended. The priest made the sign of the cross, and the crowd began to disperse toward the line of black town cars waiting to take us to the reception at the family estate on the coast. I was walking toward my car, a sensible sedan that looked out of place among the luxury SUVs, when my pocket vibrated. I pulled out my phone. The screen displayed a number I did not recognize, a local area code. I hesitated. It was rude to answer a phone at a funeral, but the vibration felt insistent, like an alarm. I stepped away from the main path, sheltering under the shade of an ancient oak tree draped in Spanish moss. "Hello?" "Maris." The voice was male, elderly, and trembling. It sounded like the friction of dry leaves on pavement. I recognized it immediately. Gideon Sutter. He was my grandfather's oldest friend and his personal attorney for 40 years. He had not been at the service. I had assumed he was too ill to attend. "Mr. Sutter?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Where are you? We missed you at the—" "Listen to me," he cut me off. His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. I could hear his breath hitching, short and shallow. "Do not go home. Do not go to the reception. And for the love of God, do not trust anyone who shares your last name." My stomach dropped. The heat of the afternoon seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden chill. "Gideon, what is going on? You're scaring me." "He sent it to me. Maris, Harlan, he mailed me an envelope the day before he died. I just opened it." There was a pause, and I heard the sound of paper being shuffled frantically. "I need you to come to my office, now. Come alone. Do not tell your father, do not tell your mother, and definitely do not tell Brent. Just drive." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Across the lawn, I saw my father looking for me. He waved, gesturing for me to get into the lead car with them. I felt a surge of nausea. "Do not trust anyone who shares your last name." I waved back, forcing a weak smile, and pointed to my stomach. miming that I felt sick. I pointed to my car and mouthed, "I'll meet you there." Warren frowned, but he nodded and turned back to Celeste. I got into my car, my hands shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to start the ignition. I did not drive toward the family estate on Seabriar Drive. Instead, I turned the wheel hard to the left, heading toward the old commercial district of Harbor Point. The drive was a blur. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots, the key in my pocket, the envelope Gideon mentioned, the warning. Why would Gideon be scared? He was a lawyer in a sleepy coastal town. He dealt with property disputes and estate planning, not life-and-death emergencies. But the fear in his voice had been real. It was the sound of a man who had looked behind a curtain and seen a monster. Mariner Row was a quiet street lined with brick buildings that dated back to the 1800s. The law office of Gideon Sutter was a narrow 2-story structure sandwiched between a closed bakery and a dusty antique shop. It was Sunday, and the street was deserted. I parked a block away, obeying an instinct I did not know I had. I walked the rest of the distance, sticking close to the walls. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement. When I reached the office, my heart hammered against my ribs. The front door was made of heavy oak with frosted glass. The sign said, "Sutter and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The lights inside were off, but the door was ajar. It was open just a crack, maybe 2 inches. I stood there on the sidewalk, the ocean breeze ruffling my hair, and I knew something was wrong. Gideon was meticulous. He never left a door unlocked, let alone open. I pushed the door. It swung inward silently. The reception area was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The air smelled of old coffee and something metallic, like copper. "Gideon?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. Then I heard it, a thud, the sound of a heavy object hitting a wall, and then the sound of a voice I knew better than my own. "Where is it, you old bat? Don't lie to me." It was a snarl, low and vicious. I crept forward, moving toward the open door of the private office at the back of the hallway. My heels clicked on the hardwood, so I slipped my shoes off, moving in my stocking feet. I reached the door frame and peered inside. The scene froze the blood in my veins. Gideon Sutter was pinned against the bookshelf. His glasses were knocked askew, hanging from one ear. His white shirt was bunched up at the collar, gripped tightly in a fist. And the person holding him, the person shaking a 70-year-old man like a rag doll, was my brother, Brent. Brent, who was supposed to be at the reception, raising a glass to our grandfather's memory. Brent, who had cried fake tears at the church. His face was twisted into a mask of pure rage that I had never seen before. His veins bulged in his neck. "He wrote a new one," Brent hissed, slamming Gideon against the shelves again. Books tumbled to the floor. "We know he did. Where is the new will?" I don't know," Gideon wheezed, his face turning a sickly shade of red. "Liar!" Brent raised his fist. I stepped into the room. "Brent!" The scream tore out of my throat before I could stop it. Brent spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at me, and for a second, he looked like the little boy I used to play tag with. But then the recognition settled in, and his expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. He did not let go of Gideon. "Maris," he said, his voice was eerily calm, "go back to the car. This doesn't concern you." "Let him go," I commanded, stepping forward. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" Gideon took advantage of Brent's distraction. He slumped down, slipping out of Brent's grasp. As he fell to his knees, his eyes locked with mine. There was no relief in them, only urgency. He reached into his jacket pocket with a trembling hand. Brent was already turning back to him, reaching for a heavy brass lamp on the desk. "No!" I lunged forward. Gideon scrambled across the floor toward me. He didn't try to stand. He just thrust his hand out. He shoved something hard and rectangular into the pocket of my coat, right next to the key. "Run," Gideon mouthed. No sound came out, but the shape of the word was unmistakable. Brent grabbed the lamp and swung it. It smashed into the bookshelf inches from Gideon's head, shattering the bulb. The room plunged into semi-darkness. "Get her!" Brent yelled. Get her? He wasn't talking to himself. My survival instinct kicked in. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to reason with him. I turned on my heel and bolted. I ran out of the office, down the hallway, my stocking feet sliding on the polished wood. I reached the front reception area. The front door, my only exit, was 10 feet away. I was reaching for the handle when a shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. I skid to a halt, my breath trapped in my throat. Standing in front of the door, blocking the exit, was a figure. They stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of them, dressed in the somber black attire of the funeral. It wasn't a client. It wasn't the police. It was my father. Warren DeWitt stood there, his face completely devoid of emotion. He looked at me not as his daughter, but as a problem that needed to be solved. He should have been at the house, greeting guests, shaking hands, playing the grieving patriarch. Instead, he was here, guarding the door while his son assaulted a lawyer in the back room. "Going somewhere, Maris?" he asked. His voice was smooth, gentle, the same tone he used when he taught me how to ride a bike. The horror of it washed over me. It wasn't just Brent. It wasn't just a moment of anger. This was coordinated. I looked at my father, then back down the dark hallway where my brother was coming for me. The funeral was over, but the war had just begun. I did not go straight home. That would have been the first place they looked. And if the scene in Gideon's office had taught me anything, it was that my family had moved past the point of subtle negotiation. I drove aimlessly for 40 minutes, checking my rearview mirror every 10 seconds, until I found a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people paid in cash and asked no questions. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, my hands still trembling. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the object Gideon had shoved at me. It was not a weapon. It was a black USB drive, wrapped crudely in electrical tape, with a small scrap of yellow legal paper taped to the side. On the paper, in Gideon's shaky handwriting, was a string of alphanumeric characters, a password. I stared at it, and the realization hit me like a splash of ice water. Gideon did not hand me the will. He did not hand me the deed to the house or a certified check. He knew they were coming for him. He knew that if he had the physical documents on his person, Brent would have taken them. Gideon had used himself as a decoy. He had bought me time. But time for what? My fingers brushed the other object in my pocket, the brass key Harlan had given me 3 months ago. When the time comes, you will know what to open. I looked at the clock on the bedside table. It was 11:30 at night. The reception at the main house would be winding down. My parents and Brent would be exhausted, likely drinking themselves into a stupor to celebrate their perceived victory or strategizing about how to deal with Gideon. I had to go back. The drive to Seabrier Drive felt like driving into the mouth of a beast. I parked my car a half-mile down the coast, tucked behind a cluster of dunes, and walked the rest of the way along the beach. The ocean was loud tonight, the waves crashing against the shore with a violence that masked the sound of my approach. The house loomed on the cliff, a sprawling architectural monster of glass and cedar that my grandfather had built 50 years ago. Most of the lights were out. Only the porch light and a dim glow from the kitchen remained. I knew the security codes, of course, but I did not dare use the front door. I circled around to the side entrance near the mudroom, a door that had a faulty latch if you lifted it just right. It was a trick I had learned when I was 16 and sneaking out to meet boys my father disapproved of. I lifted, I pulled. The door groaned softly, a sound instantly swallowed by the wind, and swung open. I slipped inside. The house smelled of expensive wine and heavy perfume, the lingering sense of the funeral reception. I took my shoes off, carrying them in my hand, and moved through the shadows of the hallway. I could hear low voices in the kitchen, my father's baritone, murmuring something indistinct, but I did not stop to listen. I needed to get upstairs. The main staircase was a trap. It was old wood, and every third step sang out like a gunshot under weight. I moved to the back servants' stairs, a narrow passage that led directly to the second floor. I climbed slowly, testing every inch of wood before shifting my weight. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was terrified they could hear it through the floorboards. I reached the second floor landing. The hallway was empty. My grandfather's suite was at the far end, facing the ocean. I turned the handle and slipped inside, closing the door softly behind me. I expected the room to smell like him, like old paper, peppermint, and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco he used to smoke before the doctors forbade it. But the air that hit me was sterile. It smelled of lemon polish and bleach. I clicked on the small pen light I had grabbed from my glove compartment. The beam swept across the room. It was empty. Not just tidy, empty. The bed was stripped to the mattress. The bedside table, usually cluttered with his books and medicine bottles, was bare. The closet door was open, revealing empty hangers. It had been less than 12 hours since we put him in the ground, and they had already erased him. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was the action of people who were terrified of what might be found amongst the clutter. But they did not know about the painting. I walked over to the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a painting of a storm-tossed ship, a moody oil piece from the 19th century that Harlan had loved. When I was 7, he had lifted me up to touch the frame and whispered that it was where pirates hid their treasure. I thought he was telling a fairy tale until I saw him slide the frame to the right one evening when he thought he was alone. I gripped the heavy gilded frame. For a second, I panicked. What if they had moved this too? What if they had found it? But the frame shifted. It slid smoothly on a hidden track, revealing a small gray metal safe embedded in the wall. It was old school, no digital keypad, just a simple keyhole. I held my breath and inserted the small brass key. It fit perfectly. I turned it. The mechanism clicked, a loud mechanical sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. I froze, listening for footsteps in the hall. Silence. I pulled the safe door open. It was not empty. Inside, there was a thick manila envelope, a sealed clear plastic bag containing a small orange pill bottle, and a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. I grabbed everything, shoved the safe door closed, and slid the painting back into place. I did not dare look at them here. I needed to get out, but the curiosity was a physical itch, burning under my skin. I retreated to the window seat, hidden by the heavy velvet curtains, and turned my pen light on the documents. I opened the manila envelope first. It contained a letter, handwritten. The script was shaky, the letters jagged, written by a hand that was losing its strength, but none of its resolve. My dearest Maris, if you are reading this, then Gideon has done his job, and I am finally at rest. I am sorry to burden you with this, but there was no one else. You were the only one who never looked at me and saw a dollar sign. For the last 11 months, I have been dying, but not from the heart failure the doctors told you about. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I started noticing the symptoms in February: the nausea, the yellow halos around lights, the confusion that felt artificial. I recognized it because I saw it in my own father before he passed. Digoxin toxicity. But my dosage had not changed in 5 years. I stopped taking the pills from the bottle on my nightstand. I hid them in my cheek and spat them out when the nurse left. Instead, I took the samples I kept in my travel kit. The symptoms stopped. When I resumed the pills from the nightstand, the symptoms returned. Someone in this house has been swapping my medication. They are replacing my maintenance dose with something much stronger. They are not trying to kill me quickly. They are trying to make my heart give out so it looks like a natural decline. They want me weak. They want me confused. I looked at the sealed plastic bag. The orange bottle inside had a label with his name on it. It looked innocent. It looked like medicine. I could have gone to the police, the letter continued, but I needed to know who, and I needed to know why now. So I played the part. I let them see me stumble. I let them see me forget names. And while they watched me fade, I watched them. I found the reason, They believe I have not updated my will since your grandmother passed 10 years ago. In that version, the estate is divided equally between your mother and uncle, with Warren as the executor. They are drowning in debt. Maris, Warren's investments have collapsed. Celeste has spent every dime of her trust. They need me to die before I decide to change anything. But I changed it 6 months ago. I picked up the stack of papers bound with the rubber band. The top document was a last will and testament. It was dated, notarized, and signed with a steady hand. I leave everything to you. The letter read, not to burden you, but to protect the legacy from being liquidated to pay for Warren's gambling debts and Brent's lawsuits. This will is valid. Gideon has the original. This is your copy. But there is more. Included in this safe are the lab results from the pills I saved. I sent them to a private lab in Charleston under a false name. They confirmed the tampering, lethal levels, Maris. If I had taken them as prescribed, I would have been dead in April. I stared at the lab report attached to the back of the letter. The numbers were stark. The toxicity levels were highlighted in red. My hands were shaking so hard, the light from the pen light danced across the paper. They didn't just wait for him to die. They were actively killing him. My mother, my father, my brother, the people downstairs who were currently drinking wine and accepting condolences. I stayed alive to trap them. The letter finished. I let them think they were succeeding. But I cannot hold on forever. My heart is truly failing now, independent of their poison. When I go, they will move fast. They will demand the will. They will try to destroy any evidence of a new one. Do not let them. Taking the money is not enough. You must take their freedom. Love, grandfather. I sat there in the dark, the letter crumpling slightly in my grip. A wave of nausea rolled over me, followed instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. The scene in the office made perfect sense now. Brent wasn't just angry about a potential new will. He was terrified. They had killed a man, committed a capital crime, based on the gamble that the old will was still in effect. If a new will existed, their motive for murder was for nothing. Worse, if a new will existed, it meant Harlan had been lucid enough to change it, which meant he might have been lucid enough to see what they were doing. They weren't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. They were fighting for their lives. I heard a sound from the hallway. Footsteps. Not the heavy, confident tread of my father. These were lighter, quick, aggressive. I clicked off the pen light and shoved the papers and the plastic bag into the deep pockets of my coat. I pressed myself back into the velvet curtains, holding my breath. The door to the room opened. Light from the hallway spilled in, cutting a rectangle across the floor. A silhouette stood in the doorway. It was Brent. He didn't turn on the light. He stood there, breathing hard, staring into the darkness of the dead man's room. He was holding something in his hand. It looked like a heavy fireplace poker. I know someone was in here, he whispered into the dark. The latch on the side door was up. I didn't move. I didn't blink. He took a step into the room. Maris, if you are in here, you are making a mistake, a really big mistake. He walked toward the bed, swinging the poker loosely by his side. He checked the closet. He checked under the bed. He turned toward the window, toward the curtains where I was hiding. My hand tightened around the key in my pocket. If he opened the curtain, I would have to fight him. And looking at the weapon in his hand, I knew he wouldn't hesitate. He had already attacked Gideon. I was just another obstacle. He reached out, his hand grasping the edge of the velvet fabric. Brent! My father's voice boomed from the bottom of the stairs. Get down here. The lawyer isn't answering his phone. We need to go back to his office. Brent froze. He stayed there for a second, his hand inches from my face, separated only by the heavy cloth. I could hear his breathing, ragged, angry. Coming, he yelled back. He let go of the curtain. He turned and marched out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the back stairs. I waited until I heard the front door open and close, and the sound of an engine starting in the driveway. I slipped out from the curtains. My legs felt weak, but my mind was razor sharp. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't just the granddaughter, I was the witness. And I had the one thing they thought they had destroyed. I had the truth. I left the room, leaving the painting slightly crooked, just enough to let them know that someone had been there. Let them panic. Let them wonder. I had a war to win. The sun came up over Harbor Point the next morning with an audacity that felt insulting. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, the kind of weather that real estate agents prayed for. But inside the DeWitt estate, the air was heavy enough to choke on. I had barely slept. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn sitting with my back against my bedroom door, a heavy oak dresser pushed in front of it. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway sounded like an indictment. I had the envelope from the safe taped to the underside of my mattress, a temporary hiding spot that made my skin crawl, but I could not leave it in my car. When I finally walked down to the kitchen at 8 o'clock, the scene was terrifyingly normal. My mother, Celeste, was standing at the stove. She was wearing a silk floral robe and flipping pancakes. The smell of batter and maple syrup filled the room, a scent that should have been comforting but now smelled like a trap. My father, Warren, sat at the head of the island, reading the Wall Street Journal, a mug of black coffee steaming by his right hand. "Morning, darling," Celeste chirped. She did not turn around, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. "I made blueberry pancakes, your favorite." I forced my legs to carry me to the stool opposite my father. "Thanks, Mom. I'm not really hungry." "Nonsense," she said, her voice tight. She slid a plate in front of me, 3 perfect circles, drowning in syrup. "You look pale. You need to eat. Grief takes a lot out of you." I picked up my fork. I could feel her eyes on me. She was watching my hands, watching my mouth. It was not maternal concern. It was assessment. She was looking for tremors. She was looking for guilt. Warren lowered his paper. His face was smooth, rested. "Sleep all right, Maris?" "Fine," I lied. Good. He took a sip of coffee. "Anyone call you this morning?" The question was casual, delivered with the same tone one might use to ask about the weather, but his eyes did not move from my face. "No," I said, cutting a piece of pancake that I had no intention of swallowing. "Why?" "Oh, no reason," Warren said. "Just a lot of logistics to handle with the estate. People are reaching out. I wanted to make sure no one was bothering you, especially legal types. They can be vultures." My heart skipped a beat. He was fishing. He wanted to know if Gideon had made contact before Brent attacked him. He wanted to know if I was compromised. "No legal types," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just a few friends from college offering condolences." Warren stared at me for 3 seconds too long. Then he smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That is good. We want to handle everything in-house. Family first, right?" "Family first," I echoed. The back door opened, and Brent walked in. He was wearing running clothes, sweating, looking like the picture of health. He stopped when he saw me. The air in the kitchen temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Maris," he nodded. "Brent." He went to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. As he drank, he watched me over the rim of the plastic bottle. There was a bruise forming on his knuckles. The hand he had used to hit the bookshelf in Gideon's office. He saw me looking at it. He didn't hide it. He just smirked, a tiny, microscopic curling of his lip. I realized then that this house was no longer a home. It was a cage, and I was in it with 3 lions who were waiting for me to turn my back. I finished the breakfast as quickly as I could, claiming I needed to run errands in town. I went upstairs, retrieved the envelope from under the mattress, and shoved it deep into my oversized tote bag, underneath a pile of old receipts and a spare sweater. I drove straight to the First National Bank on Main Street. I did not trust the safe in my apartment, and I certainly did not trust my car. I rented a safety deposit box, paying in cash. Once inside the private viewing room, I took my phone out. I spent 20 minutes photographing every single page of the documents Harlan had left me, the will, the letter, the toxicology report. I made sure every word was legible. Then, I used an encrypted app to upload the images to a cloud server that only I knew the password to. I placed the physical originals in the metal box and watched the bank manager slide it into the wall. 2 keys, one for him, one for me. It felt like locking away a bomb, but it wasn't enough. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. I had proof that Harlan was poisoned. I had proof of a new will. But I knew how my father operated. He would claim the toxicology report was forged. He would claim the will was signed under duress, or that Harlan was mentally incompetent. They had money, and they had connections. They could drag this out in court for 10 years while they spent every dime of the estate. I needed something they couldn't deny. I needed them to admit it. I pulled up a contact on my phone. Tessa Ray. Tessa and I had been roommates at Duke. She was a brilliant, cynical audio engineer who now worked as a high-end technical freelancer for corporate events and music festivals. She knew how to wire a stage for sound, but more importantly, she knew how to find data that people thought they had deleted. I sent a text, lunch, the spot with the bad fries, urgent. She replied in 30 seconds, see you in 20. We met at the Salty Spoon, a diner halfway between Harbor Point and Charleston. It was loud, greasy, and filled with truckers. The perfect place to talk without being overheard. Tessa was already there, sitting in a back booth, nursing a black coffee. She looked up as I slid into the seat. She was wearing a faded band t-shirt and her signature combat boots. Her dark eyes scanned my face, and her expression tightened. You look like hell, Maris, she said. Thanks. I heard about your grandfather. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said. He's the only one who's free. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I need you to look at something, but you can't ask me where I got it, and you can't tell anyone you saw it. Tessa put her coffee down. You know the rules. I am a vault. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted gallery. I slid the phone across the cracked laminate table. Tessa scrolled. She read the letter first. Her eyebrows shot up. Then she swiped to the toxicology report. She stopped. She zoomed in on the numbers. She looked up at me, her face pale. Digoxin, she whispered. 300 nanograms per milliliter. Jesus, Maris, that's not an accident. That's an execution. I know, I said. They did it. My parents, Brent, they switched his pills. Tessa pushed the phone back to me as if it were radioactive. Why? Money, debt, the usual sins. Harlan changed his will, and they needed him dead before he could make it public. They think the old will is still in play. So go to the police, Tessa said. You have the report. It's a private lab report commissioned by a dead man under a fake name. I argued. My father will hire a dozen experts to say the samples were contaminated, or that Harlan was senile and confused his meds. They will bury me in litigation. I need more. Tess, I need a smoking gun. Tessa drummed her fingers on the table. She was thinking. I could see the gears turning. You need a confession, she said, or a digital paper trail. Brent has a group chat, I said, remembering something. I saw a notification pop up on his phone at the funeral home yesterday. It was a group called After Tide. It seemed odd. My father and mother are in it. After Tide, Tessa mused. Like, after the tide goes out? Or after the tide comes in and washes everything away, I said grimly. If they planned this, they talked about it, Tessa said. People like your father. They are arrogant. They think they are untouchable. They don't use burner phones because they don't think anyone is watching. If we can get into that chat, or find the financial transfers for the drugs, that is your nail in the coffin. How? I asked. I can't just ask for their phones. Tessa leaned forward. We don't ask. We take. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser and grabbed a pen. Where are they going to be in the next 48 hours? All of them, together. I thought about the schedule Celeste had posted on the refrigerator. Thursday. There is a memorial boat ride, a sunset cruise for the Inner Circle friends. They rented a yacht. They will be gone from 4 o'clock until 9. 5 hours. Tessa said. The house will be empty? Yes, the staff have the evening off. Perfect. Tessa drew a crude diagram of a house on the napkin. I have a cloner. It is a device that can copy a phone's hard drive if I can physically plug into it for 3 minutes. Does Brent leave anything behind? He has an old tablet he uses for gaming, and he usually leaves his laptop in the study, but he takes his phone everywhere. The laptop will work, Tessa said. If his iMessage or WhatsApp is synced, the chat logs will be there, and we can check your father's computer for the money trail. We? I asked. You don't think I am letting you do this alone, do you? Tessa scoffed. You are reckless. Maris, you will get caught. I know how to scrub a digital footprint so they don't know we were there. It's breaking and entering, I warned her. If we get caught, Warren will destroy you too. Tessa looked me dead in the eye. Maris, they murdered your grandfather. If they find out what you know, they won't sue you. They will kill you. We are past the point of worrying about trespassing charges. She was right. The fear I had felt in the kitchen returned, cold and sharp. Okay, I said. Thursday, 5 o'clock. I'll get us the codes for the side gate. And Maris, Tessa added, gripping my hand. Until then, play the part. Be the grieving daughter. Eat the pancakes. Don't let them see you flinch. I drove back to the house with my stomach in knots. The rest of the day was a blur of fake smiles and stiff hugs. I sat in the living room while neighbors dropped off casseroles. I listened to my father tell stories about Harlan's generosity to people who didn't know he had been stealing from the estate for years. That night, the house felt even more oppressive. I went to bed early, locking my door again. Around 2 a.m, I woke up. I didn't know why. The house was silent. Then I heard it, the soft thump of a footstep outside my door. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the sliver of light under the doorframe. The shadow of 2 feet appeared, blocking the light. Someone was standing there, just standing, listening. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The doorknob turned, slowly, so slowly that if I hadn't been awake, I never would have heard it. It stopped when the lock engaged. The tension in the air was thick enough to snap. I imagined Brent on the other side, his hand on the brass knob, his head tilted against the wood, wondering if I was asleep, wondering if I was a threat. After a minute that felt like an hour, the shadow moved. The footsteps retreated down the hall, soft and deliberate. I let my breath out in a shuddering gasp. Tessa was right. They were already circling. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I had to turn the cage into a trap before they decided it was time to put me down. Thursday arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that turned the air into soup. From the vantage point of Tessa's nondescript gray sedan parked 3 streets away, we watched the harbor through a pair of binoculars. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the Sea Witch, a 50-foot yacht my father had rented to honor Harlan's memory, pulled away from the dock. I could see them on the deck. Warren was holding a martini. Celeste was adjusting her sun hat. Brent was laughing at something the captain said. They looked relaxed. They looked like people who had gotten away with it. They are clear, Tessa said, lowering the binoculars. We have 3 hours minimum, maybe 4 if they decide to do dinner on the water. Let's go, I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles were white. We drove to the service road behind the estate on Seabriar Drive. We parked in a blind spot behind the overgrown hedges that lined the neighbor's property. We didn't dress in cat burglar black suits. We wore jeans and dark t-shirts, looking like staff or maintenance workers if anyone spotted us from a distance. The house loomed above us, silent and imposing. I knew the security layout by heart. My father had installed a ring system at the front and back doors, but he had cheaped out on the side entrance near the garage, the one the gardeners used. The camera there had a blind spot if you hugged the wall tightly for 6 feet. We moved quickly. I led the way, pressing my back against the cedar siding, sliding sideways until I reached the keypad. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves. Do you remember the code? Tessa whispered. 1985, I said. The year he bought his first Porsche. He never changes it. I punched the numbers in. The keypad beeped, a sharp sound in the quiet afternoon, and the lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. I pushed the door open, and we stepped into the cool, air-conditioned silence of the house. "Don't touch anything unless you have to," Tessa commanded, her voice low and professional. "And if you move something, take a picture first so you can put it back exactly right. We are ghosts. Maris. We were never here." We split up. Tessa headed for the kitchen, where the electronics usually lived. I headed for my father's study. The study was a shrine to Warren's ego. The walls were lined with awards from civic organizations that he had bought his way into. The desk was a massive slab of mahogany, cluttered with papers. I took a picture of the desk layout with my phone before I touched a single sheet. I started with the drawers, locked. I didn't panic. I knew where he kept the key. It was taped under the bottom of his humidor. I checked. It was there. Predictable. I opened the bottom drawer. It was filled with files labeled by year. I ignored the tax returns and the investment portfolios. I was looking for something recent, something off the books. I found a folder near the back. It was labeled landscaping. Special projects. It felt wrong. We hadn't done any major landscaping in 5 years. I opened it. Inside, there were no invoices for mulch or trees. There were receipts from a company called Apex Biosolutions based in Mexico. The amounts were staggering. $5,000 in February, $7,000 in March, $12,000 in May. Attached to the May invoice was a sticky note in my father's handwriting. The scrawl was jagged, impatient. Dosage insufficient. Need the concentrated batch. Scheduled delivery for the 15th. I felt the bile rise in my throat. He was ordering poison like he was ordering fertilizer. I didn't steal the papers. If I took them, he would know someone had been here. Instead, I placed each document on the desk, smoothed it flat, and took a high-resolution photo. I captured the letterhead, the dates, the amounts, and most importantly, the handwriting. Then I put everything back in the folder, placed the folder back in the drawer, and locked it. I returned the key to the bottom of the humidor. "Maris!" Tessa's voice hissed from the hallway. "Kitchen, now." I wiped the desk surface with a microfiber cloth I had brought, just in case, and ran to the kitchen. Tessa was standing by the charging station on the granite island. Plugged into the wall was a white iPhone with a cracked screen. It was Brent's old phone. He had upgraded to the latest model 2 weeks ago, but he kept this one for his Spotify playlists and gaming apps. "Please tell me you can get in," I said. "I don't need to break the encryption," Tessa said, her eyes focused on her laptop, which she had connected to the phone via a cable. "He didn't wipe it yet, and because he's lazy. He uses the same iCloud account for both phones. This device is still synced to the family cloud. So we can see his current messages?" "Not in real time," Tessa said, typing furiously, "but I can pull the backup of his message history up until the last sync, which was," she checked the screen, 3 hours ago, just before they left. A progress bar on her laptop screen crawled forward, 80%, 90%. "Done," she said. "I have the database. Let's look." She opened a parsing program that turned the raw data into readable text. She typed "aftertide" into the search bar. The results populated the screen. It was a group chat. The participants were labeled simply Dad, Mom, Brent. I leaned over her shoulder, reading the text, and I felt my heart turn to stone. April 3rd. Mom. He is complaining about the nausea again. The nurse almost called the doctor. I handled it. Told her it was the seafood. April 3rd. Dad. Keep him calm. The new batch arrives Tuesday. We need 2 more months to clear the escrow on the beach house. May 10th. Brent. Why is he taking so long? I have collectors calling me. I thought you said this stuff was fast. May 10th. Dad. Patience. If we rush it, it looks like a heart attack. We need it to look like failure. Slow and steady wins the race. June 15th. Mom. He signed the papers for the trust transfer today, or he thought he did. He was so confused he didn't even read them. And then, the most recent message, sent yesterday, right after the funeral. Brent, image attachment. Tessa clicked the image. It expanded to fill the screen. It was a photo of a black duffel bag, unzipped. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, wrapped in bank bands. It looked like at least $50,000. Brent, first installment from the liquidator. We are rich. Folks, the old man is finally paying rent. I stared at the screen. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. It wasn't just greed. It was contempt. They hated him. They hated him because he had money and they didn't. They watched him die, day by day, measuring his pulse against their bank accounts. We have it, Tessa said softly. Her voice lacked its usual cynicism. She sounded horrified. This connects the payments, the medical tampering, and the motive. It is a full confession. Copy it, I said. My voice sounded hollow. Copy everything, the metadata, the timestamps, the contact info. Already doing it, Tessa said. I am dumping it to 2 separate encrypted drives and mirroring it to a secure server in Sweden. Even if they smash this laptop, the data exists. She unplugged the phone. She wiped the screen with her shirt sleeve to remove any fingerprints. She placed it back on the charging dock, adjusting the angle until it matched the photo she had taken when we entered. We need to go, she said. We have been here 20 minutes. That is pushing our luck. We did a final sweep. We checked the floor for footprints. We checked the counters. We made sure the side door locked behind us. Walking back to the car, the evening air felt different. Before, the humidity had been oppressive. Now, I felt cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. I sat in the passenger seat of Tessa's car as she navigated away from the neighborhood. I looked out the window at the manicured lawns and the beautiful houses of Harbor Point. It all looked like a facade now. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about him sitting in his chair, feeling his heart flutter, feeling the nausea rise, looking at the people he raised and wondering why he was dying. He had figured it out alone. He had died alone so that I could have this moment. Are you okay? Tessa asked, glancing at me. No, I said. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. The trembling had stopped. They didn't just kill him, Tessa, I said. They processed him, like he was a transaction. I closed my eyes, and the image of the money in the duffel bag burned behind my eyelids. Drive faster, I said. We have a funeral to finish. We have the texts, Tessa said, her eyes fixed on the road as we put distance between us and the estate. And we have the financial records, but in a courtroom, a good defense attorney will call them circumstantial. They will say the phone was hacked. They will say the invoices were for legitimate supplements. They will create doubt. I looked at the hard drive resting in my lap. It felt heavy, like a brick, but I understood what she was saying. Paperwork was dry. It was clinical. It did not make a jury feel the cold, hard reality of murder. What do we need? I asked. We need a voice, Tessa said. We need them to say it out loud. No ambiguity, no interpretation, just their own words hanging them. She turned the car onto a side road that led back toward the service entrance of the DeWitt property. We are going back? I asked, my pulse spiking again. Not inside the house, Tessa reassured me. The garage, it is the transition zone. People let their guard down when they get out of the car. They talk while they are unloading, and the acoustics in a concrete box are perfect for what I have in mind. She reached into her equipment bag in the back seat and pulled out a small, black rectangle about the size of a matchbox. High-gain microphone, she explained. Magnetic. Battery life is 72 hours. It transmits to a receiver within a 2-block radius. We plant it, we park, and we listen. We parked the car in the same blind spot behind the hedges. The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long orange shadows across the lawn. We knew the family was still on the boat, likely drinking champagne and toasting to their future wealth. I punched the code into the garage keypad. It opened with a mechanical groan. The garage was empty, smelling of motor oil and the sea salt that coated everything in Harbor Point. My father's vintage Jaguar was under a tarp in the corner. Brent's massive truck was gone, as they had taken it to the marina. Tessa moved quickly. She didn't hide the device in a complex spot. She walked to the metal shelving unit near the door that led into the house, the spot where everyone paused to find their keys or take off their shoes. She reached under the bottom shelf and clicked the magnet into place. It was invisible unless you were lying on the floor looking up. "Done," she whispered. We retreated. We didn't take Tessa's car this time. It was too recognizable if we were going to sit for hours. We drove to the rental agency near the airport and swapped her sedan for a generic, dark blue compact car with tinted windows. By 8 o'clock that night, we were parked on the street parallel to Seabriar Drive. We were far enough away to be just another parked car, but close enough for the signal. Tessa sat in the driver's seat with a laptop open on her knees. She handed me a pair of noise-canceling headphones. "Put them on," she said. "The gain is high. If a squirrel runs across the floor, it will sound like a bomb going off. Adjust the volume here." I slid the headphones over my ears. The world outside the car vanished. All I could hear was a low, static hum, the sound of the empty garage. It was a ghostly sound, the auditory equivalent of holding your breath. We waited, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. My legs were cramping. The air in the car was stale, smelling of synthetic upholstery and nervous sweat. I watched the digital waveform on Tessa's screen. It was a flat green line, barely moving. Then at 9:15, the line spiked red. A rumble. Through the headphones, it sounded like an earthquake. "They are here," Tessa mouthed, tapping the record button. I heard the mechanical whine of the garage door opening. It was deafening. Then the heavy, throaty idle of Brent's truck pulling in. The engine cut. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ticking of cooling metal. A car door slammed, then another. "God, my head," a woman's voice said. It was crystal clear, as if she were sitting in the back seat of our car. Celeste. "That champagne was cheap. Warren, remind me never to rent from that charter again." "It did the job." "Celeste," my father's voice replied. He sounded tired but lighter than he had in months. "Stop complaining. We have bigger things to focus on." I heard the sound of footsteps on concrete, the rustle of clothing. "Did you check the safe?" Brent's voice cut in. He sounded slurred, aggressive. He was drunk. "I want to count it again." "Keep your voice down," Warren snapped, "and leave the cash alone. It is for the travel fund, not for you to blow on poker." "Travel fund," Brent scoffed. "We are fleeing. Dad, let's call it what it is. When do we leave?" There was a pause. I could hear the jingle of keys. They were standing right by the shelf. "Monday," Warren said. "The bank releases the hold on the main accounts at 9 in the morning. I wire the funds to the Cayman Shell Company by 9:30. We are on a plane to Belize by noon. The house is already listed with a private broker. We sell it as is." "What about the brat?" Brent asked. "Maris." My breath hitched. Hearing my name in that dark car, spoken with such venom, made my skin crawl. "She is a non-issue," Celeste said. Her voice was chillingly dismissive. "She has no idea. She is walking around with that tragic look on her face, thinking her grandfather died of old age. It is almost pathetic." "She thinks she is smart," Brent laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Did you see her at the funeral? Trying to look strong. She's going to wake up on Tuesday with nothing, no house, no money, just a pile of scraps." "She gets the photo albums," Warren said dryly. "That seems fair." "I still can't believe it worked," Celeste said. There was a smile in her voice. "The timing was tight. When the nurse called about his heart rate dropping last week, I thought we were done. I thought the doctor would order a full panel." "He didn't," Warren said. "Because you are a good actress, darling." "It wasn't just acting," Celeste said. "And this was the moment the trap snapped shut. It was the source, that lab in Mexico. They are artists. The pills looked identical, even the imprint code on the side. Harlan took them for 3 weeks and thanked me for bringing him his water. He thanked me for killing him." I gasped. I couldn't help it. I ripped the headphones off, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. Tessa didn't flinch. Her eyes were glued to the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Did you get that?" I choked out. "I got it," Tessa whispered. "Every syllable. The timestamp is locked. The audio signature is verified." I put the headphones back on, just in time to hear the door to the house open. "Let's go inside," Warren said. "I need a real drink. And Brent, clean up this truck. It smells like bait." Yeah, Brent muttered. The door from the garage to the house closed with a solid thud. The waveform on the laptop screen went flat again. I sat back in the seat, feeling like I had just run a marathon. The silence in the car was heavy, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a weapon that had just been loaded. They had confessed. They had laid out the timeline. They had admitted to the forgery of the pills. They had mocked the victim. Tessa stopped the recording. She pulled a small flash drive from the side of the laptop and handed it to me. "That," she said, her voice grim, "is the end of their lives." I closed my fingers around the drive. It was small, plastic, insignificant, but it held the weight of justice. "They leave Monday," I said, my voice finding its strength. "They are going to run." "Not if we stop them," Tessa said. She started the car. "We have 72 hours before that wire transfer happens. We need to move." I looked out the window at the dark outline of the neighborhood. The lights in my parents' house had just flickered on. I could imagine them pouring drinks, laughing, thinking they were the smartest people in the room. They didn't know that the room had glass walls, and we were standing on the other side with a sledgehammer. The reading of the last will and testament of Harlan DeWitt was not a private family affair. It was a spectator sport. The venue was the executive conference room of the First Coastal Bank in downtown Harbor Point, a glass-walled aquarium of a room that overlooked the busy street. My grandfather had done business here for 50 years, and in a small town, that meant the bank manager, the senior loan officers, and half the Chamber of Commerce felt entitled to be present. There were also neighbors, the kind who brought casseroles to the front door and gossip to the back, and a freelance journalist for the local Gazette who was pretending to check his email in the corner. My family arrived 10 minutes late. It was a power move. Warren walked in first, wearing a navy suit that cost $3,000. He nodded to the bank manager with the benevolent exhaustion of a king who had just buried a predecessor. Celeste trailed behind him, dressed in severe black, clutching a handkerchief she didn't need. Brent brought up the rear. He looked hungover, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses that he didn't remove even when he stepped into the fluorescent light. They took the 3 seats at the head of the mahogany table. They didn't look at me. To them, I was already a ghost. I sat at the far end, near the door, next to a portable projector screen that had been set up for video testimony, or so the invitation had claimed. Gideon Sutter stood at the podium. He looked terrible. His left eye was swollen shut, a bruise blooming across his cheekbone like an oil slick. His arm was in a sling. When Warren saw him, he didn't flinch. He just smiled. A tight, predatory expression that said, "You should have learned your lesson." "Thank you all for coming," Gideon said. His voice was raspy, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "We are here to execute the final wishes of Harlan DeWitt." "Let's get on with it." "Gideon," Warren interrupted, checking his gold watch. "We have a lot of administrative work to do this afternoon." "Indeed," Gideon said. He adjusted his glasses with his good hand. "I am reading from the last will and testament dated November 12th of last year." The room went deadly silent. Warren froze. His hand, which had been reaching for a pitcher of water, stopped in midair. "Excuse me? The will is dated 2014. We have the copy in our safe." "That will was revoked," Gideon said, his voice sharpening like a blade. "Mr. DeWitt drafted, notarized, and filed a new document 6 months ago. He did so in my presence. He was of sound mind and body." Celeste made a noise that sounded like a strangled cat. "That is impossible. He never went to your office in November. He was bedridden. He came to me, Gideon corrected. Now, please save your comments until the end. He looked down at the document. To my daughter, Celeste, and her husband, Warren. Gideon paused. He looked up, making direct eye contact with my father. I leave the sum of $5,000 to be used for the repayment of any outstanding debts they may have accrued in my name. I also leave them the contents of the gardening shed, as they have shown such an interest in landscaping chemicals recently. A ripple of confusion went through the room. The neighbors exchanged glances. Landscaping chemicals? Warren stood up, his face turning a violent shade of purple. This is a joke. This is a forgery. You senile old bat. I will have your license for this. Sit down, Gideon barked. It was a command so forceful that Warren actually hesitated. To my grandson, Brent, Gideon continued, reading faster now. I leave a trust fund of $10,000, which will be made available to him only upon the successful completion of a drug rehabilitation program and 5 years of gainful employment. Brent ripped his sunglasses off. His eyes were bloodshot and wide with panic. 10,000? You can't live on 10,000. That's my money. And finally, Gideon said, his voice softening as he looked at me, to my granddaughter, Maris DeWitt, I leave the remainder of my estate, the properties on Seabrier Drive and in Charleston, the investment portfolios, the liquid assets, and the controlling interest in DeWitt Enterprises. The room exploded. No! Celeste shrieked, jumping to her feet. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She did this. She manipulated him. She forced him to sign this trash. Look at her. She has been poisoning his mind against us for years. I am contesting this, Warren roared, slamming his fist on the table. The water pitcher rattled. I am the executor. I demand a forensic audit. That document is a lie. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my pocket and pressed a button on a small remote control. The projector screen beside me hummed to life. The room went dark as the lights dimmed automatically. A feature Tessa had hacked into the room's control system 10 minutes before the meeting started. On the screen, a massive image appeared. It was not a legal document. It was a screenshot of a text message thread. The header read, "After Tide." The text was blown up so large that even the people in the back row could read it. Dad, keep him calm. The new batch arrives Tuesday. We need 2 more months. Brent, why is he taking so long? I have collectors calling me. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the silence of 100 people simultaneously realizing they were witnessing a catastrophe. What is this? Warren whispered. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Turn it off, Brent yelled. He lunged toward the projector, but I had anticipated this. 2 large men in dark suits, private security I had hired with the last of my savings, stepped out from the wall and blocked his path. We are not done, I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was calm, cold, and clear. I pressed the button again. The audio started. It wasn't static-filled or grainy. It was digital, high-definition audio, amplified by the bank's conference speakers. The sound of a car door slamming. Celeste's voice. It wasn't just acting. It was the source, that lab in Mexico. They are artists. The pills looked identical. The gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen out of the room. The journalist in the corner was typing furiously on his phone. The bank manager had his hand over his mouth. Celeste's voice continued. Harlan took them for 3 weeks and thanked me for bringing him his water. He thanked me for killing him. Celeste collapsed into her chair. She didn't faint. She just folded, as if her spine had been removed. She stared at the speaker in the center of the table with horror. Then came the visual kicker. The screen changed to the photo Brent had sent. The black duffel bag. The stacks of $100 bills. Brent's voice. First installment from the liquidator. We are rich, folks. The old man is finally paying rent. The room descended into chaos. It wasn't the polite murmuring of a confused crowd. It was a mob. People were standing up, shouting, pointing. Every single person who had a smartphone had it out. They were recording. They were live streaming. The video of my family's confession was hitting the internet before the echo of their voices had even faded. "You bitch!" Brent screamed. He didn't try to get to the projector this time. He came for me. He vaulted over the corner of the mahogany table, knocking over a tray of coffee. His face was twisted into something feral. He looked exactly as he had in the office when he attacked Gideon, a man with nothing left to lose. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. The security guard intercepted him in midair. It was a brutal, efficient tackle. Brent hit the carpet with a thud that shook the floor. He scrambled, kicking and spitting, screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. "Let me go, that recording is fake. It's AI, she made it up." Warren was backing away toward the door, looking for an exit, but the crowd had blocked the way. They weren't letting him leave. A woman from the garden club stood in front of him, her arms crossed, looking at him with pure disgust. Gideon tapped the podium with his gavel. It was a small sound, but it cut through the noise. "There is one final clause," Gideon announced. He was shouting now to be heard over Brent's screaming. "The no contest clause." He held up the will. Mr. DeWitt was very specific. If any beneficiary contests the validity of this will or attempts to impede its execution in any way, they are immediately stripped of all bequests, including the $5,000, including the trust. If you fight this, you leave with absolutely nothing. Gideon looked down at Brent, who was being pinned to the floor by the guard. "And considering the evidence we just heard," Gideon added, "I believe you have forfeited your right to remain in this room." The heavy double doors of the conference room burst open. It wasn't the police. Not yet. It was the bank's armed security team, followed closely by 2 uniformed officers who had been stationed in the lobby. They had heard the commotion. "Everyone back!" the lead officer shouted, his hand resting on his holster. The room was a frenzy of flashing lights from cameras and shouting voices. I looked at my father. He was pressed against the wall, his perfect suit rumpled, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He looked at the screen where his own text messages were still displayed. He looked at Celeste, who was sobbing into her hands, and then he looked at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was no regret. There was only a cold, calculating assessment of how much damage control he would need to do. But he didn't know the half of it. He thought this was just about money. He thought he could hire a lawyer, claim the recording was inadmissible, and spin the narrative. He didn't know that the federal agents were already reviewing the wire transfer requests he had set up for Monday. I stood up slowly. I picked up the remote control and placed it gently on the table. "The funeral is over," I said to him, though I doubted he could hear me over the noise. "Now we bury the lies." I turned and walked toward the side exit, escorted by the second bodyguard. As I passed Brent, who was now handcuffed and being hauled to his feet by the police for assault, he lunged at me one last time, spitting on the hem of my dress. "You are dead, Maris," he screamed. "You hear me? You are dead." I didn't look back. I walked out of the conference room and into the cool, quiet hallway of the bank. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs, hard and fast. 1, 2, 3. I pulled my phone out. I had one text message from Tessa. "The bait is set. Get ready for the run." I took a deep breath. The public humiliation was done. The mask was off. Now came the dangerous part. A wounded animal is the most vicious thing on earth, and I had just wounded 3 of them in front of the entire town. They wouldn't go to jail quietly. They would run. And we were going to be the ones to open the door for them. The law is a slow, grinding machine, and money is the grease that makes it slip. That is the only explanation for why, 6 hours after the disaster at the bank, my family was not sitting in a concrete cell. Brent had been arrested for assault, yes, but Warren had called in a favor with a bail bondsman he used to play golf with, and by 5 in the afternoon, my brother was walking out of the precinct, hiding his face under a hoodie. As for the murder confession, the audio was damning, but their lawyers, a team of sharks from Charleston, had already filed motions claiming the recording was illegally obtained, digitally manipulated, and inadmissible hearsay. They argued that without an official autopsy confirming the digoxin levels, the recording was just a drunk family blowing off steam. They bought themselves a window. It was a small window, maybe 24 hours before a judge signed a warrant for homicide, but it was enough. "They are going to run," I told Gideon. We were sitting in a secure conference room at the local FBI field office. The room smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. "They are already moving," Gideon said. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his bruised face a map of the violence he had endured. "I received an alert from the bank. Warren tried to wire $300,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands 10 minutes ago. The bank froze it because of the probate hold. If he can't move the money electronically, he will try to take what he has," said the man sitting across from us. Special Agent Miller was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He specialized in white-collar crime and wire fraud. He had been listening to our story for an hour, his face unreadable. "We have the toxicology report," Miller said, "and we have the recording. But to make a federal case stick immediately, to deny them bail when we pick them up for good, we need to prove flight risk and intent to launder assets. We need to catch them with their hands in the cookie jar, trying to leave the country." "They have a boat," I said. "The Sea Witch. It is a rental, but they have a standing lease, and my father has a friend with a Hatteras yacht that is docked privately in Savannah. If they get into international waters, we lose them." "We can't just blockade the ocean," Miller said. "We need them to come to us. We need them to make a mistake." I looked at Tessa, who was typing on her laptop in the corner. She stopped and looked up. "Greed," Tessa said. "Warren is panic-stricken because the wire transfer failed. He thinks he is leaving with nothing. If we offer him a lifeline, he will grab it." "What kind of lifeline?" Miller asked. "Arthur Vance," I said, realizing where Tessa was going. "My grandfather's old accountant. He retired 5 years ago and moved to Florida. But Warren still thinks he handles the gray area accounts. Warren always believed Harlan had a slush fund hidden away." "We resurrect Arthur," Tessa said. "I can spoof his old number. We send a message saying he heard about the death. He knows about the investigation, and he is holding a significant amount of cash that Harlan left off the books. He wants to hand it over before the feds find it." Agent Miller leaned back. He looked at me, then at Tessa. A small, dry smile touched his lips. "Entrapment is tricky, but if you are just conveying information about an asset that doesn't exist, and they show up to claim it, it confirms they are trying to seize assets and flee." Gideon finished. "Do it," Miller said. "But you two are nowhere near the takedown. You are observers only." Tessa set the trap at 7 o'clock that evening. She sent the text to Warren's secure messaging app, the one he thought was encrypted. "Mr. DeWitt, this is Vance. Heard about the trouble. I am holding the liquidity package Harlan entrusted to me in 2019. $250,000 in mixed currency. Too hot for me to hold with the feds sniffing around. I am at the old loading dock at Shadow Creek Marina. Midnight. Come alone. If you are not here, I burn it." We waited. The seconds ticked by like hours. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then the reply came. "We are coming. Do not leave. Wait for us." "He bit," Tessa whispered. "He didn't even ask for proof. He is desperate." $250,000 is enough to start over in Belize, I said. "He thinks he just won the lottery." The Shadow Creek Marina was a desolate stretch of rotting wood and rusted metal on the far north side of the harbor. It had been abandoned since the hurricane 3 years ago. It was the perfect place for a crime, which meant it was the perfect place for an arrest. At 11:30 at night, Tessa and I were parked in a rented SUV on a bluff overlooking the marina. We were a quarter of a mile away, watching through high-powered night vision binoculars provided by Agent Miller. The marina was pitch black, the moon was obscured by heavy clouds, and the only light came from the distant blinking red light of a channel marker. "I don't see the agents," I whispered. "You are not supposed to. Tessa said. "They are there. Miller has a team in the warehouse and divers in the water." At 11:55, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the access road. It was a black SUV. Not my father's Jaguar. That was too conspicuous. This was a rental. A suburban tank meant to blend in. The car rolled slowly onto the cracked asphalt of the pier. It stopped near the end, facing the water. The doors opened. Warren got out first. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his frame. He was wearing a dark windbreaker and a baseball cap. He looked around, scanning the shadows. Then Celeste emerged. She was struggling with a massive suitcase. It looked heavy. Finally, Brent. He jumped out of the back seat. He wasn't carrying luggage. He was carrying a crowbar. "They are loaded heavy," Tessa noted, adjusting the focus on the binoculars. "Look at the suspension on that car. And look at the bags. They cleared out the house." "They are not planning to go back," I said. "They are going to take the cash from Vance and then drive straight to whatever boat is waiting for them down the coast." I watched my family huddle together by the car. They were arguing. I could see Warren pointing at his watch, then pointing at the dark, empty boathouse at the end of the pier. Brent was pacing, swinging the crowbar. They looked small. That was the thing that surprised me. All my life, they had been these looming, powerful figures who controlled my reality. Now, huddled against the wind on a rotting dock, chasing a phantom bag of money, they just looked like common thieves. "They are moving," Tessa said. Warren took the lead. He walked toward the boathouse, his flashlight cutting an erratic beam through the gloom. Celeste dragged her suitcase behind him, the wheels rumbling on the wooden planks. Brent followed, watching their rear. They walked right past the hidden positions of the tactical team. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic rhythm of justice, justice, justice. They reached the end of the pier. There was no one there. Just the dark water lapping against the pilings and the smell of dead fish. Warren stopped. He spun around, shining his light into the empty corners of the boathouse. I could see him shouting, though the wind carried his words away. He was calling for Vance. He was calling for the money. Brent kicked a crate in frustration. "Wait for it," Tessa whispered. Suddenly, Warren froze. He looked down at his phone. Maybe he was expecting another text. Maybe he was realizing, for the first time in 48 hours, that he wasn't the one writing the script. He dropped the phone. He grabbed Celeste's arm and pointed back toward the car. They turned to run. But the darkness didn't let them go. From the roof of the warehouse, from behind the rusted shipping containers, from the water itself, floodlights snapped on. 6 banks of blinding white LED tactical lights flooded the pier. It was brighter than noon. My family froze. They were illuminated like actors on a stage, trapped in the harsh glare of their own choices. "Federal agents," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Drop the weapon. Hands in the air. Do it now." I lowered the binoculars. I didn't need magnification to see this. I saw Brent drop the crowbar. It clattered on the wood. I saw Celeste's hands fly up to cover her face, and I saw my father, Warren DeWitt, the man who thought he could outsmart death itself, slowly raise his empty hands above his head. They weren't running to freedom. They had run straight into the end of the line. I watched through the high-powered binoculars as the scene on the pier unfolded with the stark, high-definition clarity of a nightmare finally ending. The wind off the harbor was picking up, whipping the dark water into whitecaps. But on that wooden stage, time seemed to slow down. Technically, the lights had already blinded them. Technically, the announcement of federal agents had already boomed across the water. But human greed is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the brain to danger until it is far too late. Warren DeWitt did not immediately raise his hands. He did not drop to his knees. His brain, wired for decades to obsess over profit and loss, could not process the tactical gear or the weapons pointed at his chest. His eyes were locked on a single object, a silver aluminum briefcase resting at the feet of the lead agent, a man he still desperately wanted to believe was Arthur Vance. The agent, a tall man wearing a windbreaker with FBI stenciled in yellow on the back, took a step forward. He did not draw his weapon. He simply nudged the case with his boot. And that was when my father spoke. His voice was caught clearly by the directional microphones we had planted hours earlier, transmitting directly to the recorder in our SUV. It was not a cry for mercy. It was not a question of legal rights. "Is the cash sufficient?" Warren shouted over the wind, his voice cracking with a manic desperation. "Did you bring the full 250,000? How many bundles are in there?" I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Beside me, Tessa tapped the keyboard of her laptop, verifying that the audio was clean. "He just nailed his own coffin," Tessa whispered. "He is negotiating the transaction during an arrest." On the pier, the absurdity continued. Brent, who had dropped his crowbar but was still standing with his legs spread in a combative stance, sneered at the agents. He didn't seem to understand the gravity of the federal seal on their jackets. To him, they were just obstacles between him and his inheritance. "Give us the bag," Brent yelled. "We earned this. That bitch Maris won't keep anything. She is going to rot in a studio apartment while we are living like kings." It was perfect. It was vile, hateful, and absolutely perfect. With one sentence, Brent had confirmed his intent to defraud, his malice, and his motive. He had stripped away any defense lawyer's argument that this was a misunderstanding or a family dispute. The lead agent didn't say a word. He simply leaned down and unlatched the silver case. Warren took a step forward, his hands twitching at his sides. Celeste stopped crying for a second, craning her neck to see the salvation inside the box. The agent threw the lid open. It was empty, save for a single sheet of white paper taped to the inside lid, even from a quarter of a mile away. I couldn't read the text, but Agent Miller had told me earlier what it said. It was a photocopy of the arrest warrant. The moment the empty box was revealed, the reality finally shattered the delusion. Warren's face collapsed. It wasn't just disappointment. It was the physical look of a man watching his entire universe implode. The money wasn't real. Vance wasn't real. The escape wasn't real. "Move in," the lead agent commanded. The scene shifted from psychological thriller to procedural action. It was swift, violent, and devoid of romance. Two agents moved on Brent first. He didn't go quietly. True to the violent nature I had seen in Gideon's office, Brent swung a wild punch at the nearest officer. It was a mistake. The agent ducked, swept Brent's leg, and drove him into the wet wood of the pier. The sound of the impact traveled across the water, a dull, heavy thud. Brent screamed, a high, enraged sound, as his arm was wrenched behind his back. "Get off me! Do you know who I am? My father owns this town." "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and assaulting a federal officer," the agent recited, his voice calm and bored. Click, click. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is distinct. It is a mechanical, final sound. It signifies the end of agency. You are no longer a person who makes choices. You are a package to be processed. Celeste was next. She didn't fight. She crumbled. She sank to her knees on the dirty wood, ruining her designer trousers. She reached out toward the agents, her hands clasped in a parody of prayer. "Please," she wailed, her voice carrying clearly over the microphone feed. "We didn't mean to hurt him. It was just a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help him. He was sick." "Save it for the judge, Mrs. DeWitt," an agent said, pulling her arms behind her back. She went limp, sobbing hysterically, a sound that grated on my nerves. It was the cry of a woman who was sorry she got caught. Not sorry for what she did. Her tears were for the lost yacht trip, for the lost social standing, for the lost comfort. They were not for Harlan. And then there was Warren. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He stood perfectly still. Looking at the empty briefcase, an agent approached him, grabbed his wrist, and spun him around. Warren complied, his movements stiff and robotic. As the cuffs locked around his wrists, He looked up. He looked past the agents, past the lights, staring out into the darkness where he knew I was watching. He couldn't see me. Of course, I was a shadow on a bluff, but he knew. I saw the realization hit him. He finally understood the architecture of his downfall. It wasn't the police who had outsmarted him. It wasn't the government. It was Harlan. Warren realized that the old man he had mocked, the man he had poisoned and dismissed as senile, had orchestrated this entire evening from the grave. Harlan had known Warren's greed was his fatal flaw. Harlan had known that if he dangled a carrot, Warren would walk into a bear trap, and he realized that I, his daughter, had not just inherited the money, I had inherited the will to pull the trigger. The body cameras on the agent's chests were blinking red, recording every micro-expression, every plea, every confession. The surveillance cameras mounted on the warehouse roof were capturing the wide angle. The audio feed was capturing the dialogue. They had wrapped themselves in a cocoon of evidence so thick that no lawyer in the world could cut them free. "Secure the vehicle," the lead agent ordered. "Bag the phones, bag the luggage. I want a full inventory of the cash in the car." "Copy that." I watched as they marched my family down the pier. They looked different now, without the backdrop of the mansion, without the expensive clothes being perfectly pressed, without the arrogance of wealth. They looked small. They looked like 3 criminals being dragged into the light. Brent was shoved into the back of a squad car, still kicking at the window. Celeste was helped into another, her head hanging low, her shoulders shaking. Warren was placed in the 3rd car. He sat upright, staring straight ahead, his face a mask of shock. The flashing blue and red lights painted the scene in a chaotic strobe. "It is done," Tessa said beside me. She closed her laptop. "The feed is cut. The evidence is secured." I didn't answer immediately. I lowered the binoculars and looked at the pier with my naked eyes. It was just a collection of lights and noise now. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel a surge of adrenaline or joy, but I didn't. I felt cold. I felt the hollowness of realizing that the people who were supposed to love me were capable of monstrous things. I felt the weight of the last 11 months, the lies, the fear, the grief I hadn't been allowed to process. "Maris?" Tessa touched my arm. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. I want to see them leave." We sat there in the darkness until the convoy of police cars began to move, one by one. They turned around on the narrow access road and drove away, their sirens wailing into the night. They were taking my parents and my brother to a holding cell where they would trade their silk sheets for concrete benches. The pier emptied out. The tactical lights were turned off, plunging the marina back into darkness. Only the sound of the wind remained. "Let's go," I said, turning the key in the ignition. "I have a meeting with Gideon in the morning. We have a lot of paperwork to do." "You are not going to celebrate?" Tessa asked, looking at me with concern. "No," I said. "There is nothing to celebrate. They are gone. That is enough." I drove away from the marina without looking back. My silence was not a lack of emotion. It was a verdict. I had spoken for Harlan when he couldn't speak for himself, and tonight, the truth didn't need to scream. It just needed to be written down in the police report, sealed in an evidence bag, and locked away forever. The funeral was finally, truly over. The trial of the people versus Warren, Celeste, and Brent DeWitt did not begin with a bang. It began with the shuffling of paper, thousands of pages of paper. The courtroom in Charleston was a windowless box of oak and fluorescent light, chilled to a temperature that required a sweater even in July. I sat behind the prosecution table, my hands folded in my lap. I was not the defendant, but I felt the weight of every eye in the room. The district attorney, a sharp-featured man named Harrison, stood up for his opening statement. He did not pace. He did not shout. He leaned against the jury box, looking each juror in the eye with a terrifying calmness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, "the defense will try to tell you this is a tragedy about a grieving family and a misunderstood medical condition. They are lying. This case is not about grief. It is about a calendar. We are going to show you that the murder of Harlan DeWitt was not a crime of passion. It was a line item in a budget. We are not here to prove who did it. We are here to prove how long they planned it and how cold they were while they watched him die. It was a strong opening, but the defense team was expensive. Their lead attorney, a man named Sterling with a voice like oiled leather, stood up and immediately went on the attack. He walked over to where my parents sat. Warren looked frail, wearing a sweater instead of a suit. Celeste was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Brent sat staring at the table, his jaw clenched. "My clients are victims," Sterling announced. "Victims of a paranoid, senile old man who lost his grip on reality, and victims of a granddaughter," he gestured accusingly at me, "who manipulated that paranoia to steal an inheritance. The prosecution has a lot of digital tricks, but they lack context. They want you to believe a loving daughter killed her father. It is absurd." It made my stomach churn, but I knew the game. They were playing to the emotions. We were playing to the evidence. I was the first witness called. Walking to the stand felt like walking a tightrope. I swore the oath. I sat down. "Ms. DeWitt," Harrison asked, "tell us about the key." I recounted the timeline with surgical precision. I described the moment in the hospice room. I described the hidden safe behind the painting. I described the contents. "Did you alter any of these documents?" Harrison asked. "No," I said. "I took them directly from the safe to a secure deposit box at First National Bank. The access logs at the bank show I was there for 12 minutes. I never touched the originals again until I handed them to the FBI." Sterling's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint me as a failed project manager who needed money. "Isn't it true, Ms. DeWitt, that you were struggling with your mortgage?" Sterling asked, leaning in close. "Isn't it true you resented your brother for his lifestyle?" "My financial status is irrelevant to the toxicology report," I answered, keeping my voice level. "And I did not resent my brother. I pitied him." Sterling flushed. "You claim you found these pills. How do we know you didn't plant them?" "Because the purchase orders for the pills were signed by my father," I said, looking directly at Warren. "And the handwriting on the delivery notes matches the handwriting on his checks. Unless you are suggesting I spent 5 years learning to forge my father's signature to buy poison from a Mexican shell company, the paper trail speaks for itself." Next came Tessa. She was the anchor of our case. The defense had filed motion after motion to suppress the digital evidence, claiming it could be deep-faked or AI-generated. Tessa walked in wearing a blazer over her band t-shirt, carrying a laptop. She didn't speak in metaphors. She spoke in code. "Ms. Ray," Harrison asked, "how can we be sure the audio recording from the garage is authentic?" "Hash values," Tessa explained. Turning to the jury, think of a hash value like a digital fingerprint. When a file is created, it generates a unique string of characters. If you change even 1 millisecond of audio, if you edit one word, that fingerprint changes completely. The files on the drive I gave the FBI match the files on the original recorder perfectly. The metadata shows the exact time of creation. It is mathematically impossible for this to be a forgery. She pulled up a visual on the courtroom screens. It showed the timeline of the text messages from the Aftertide group chat, juxtaposed with the bank transfers from Warren's accounts. "Here," she pointed to a red bar on the graph. "May 10th. Warren DeWitt texts, 'The new batch arrives Tuesday.' On May 11th, a wire transfer of $12,000 leaves his account to Apex Biosolutions. On May 12th, a package is signed for at the house by Celeste DeWitt. The digital footprint matches the physical reality." The jury was taking notes. I saw a woman in the back row frown, looking from the screen to my mother. The facade was cracking. Then came Gideon. His testimony was short, but it did the one thing numbers couldn't do. It added violence. He described the scene in his office. He described Brent's hands around his throat. He described the terror of a man who realized his clients were not grieving, but hunting. "He demanded the new will," Gideon rasped, pointing a shaking finger at Brent. He didn't ask if one existed. He demanded it. He knew. They all knew. But the nail in the coffin was the audio. Harrison requested permission to play the garage recording again. The judge allowed it, over Sterling's strenuous objections. The courtroom went silent. The bailiff pressed play. The sound of the garage door opening filled the room. Then, the voices. Celeste. He thanked me for killing him. I watched the jury. When that line was spoken, 3 jurors recoiled physically. They looked at Celeste, who was currently weeping into her hands at the defense table. On the tape, her voice was arrogant, proud. In the room, she was a fragile victim. The contrast was grotesque. The jury looked from the sobbing woman to the speaker, and I saw the moment their sympathy died. They realized the woman at the table was a performance. The voice on the tape was the person. Warren. We sell it as is. Brent. She is going to wake up on Tuesday with nothing. The callousness hung in the air like smoke. Harrison paused the tape. The defense wants you to believe this was a family venting stress, but let us look at the visual evidence recovered from Brent DeWitt's phone. The screen changed, the photo of the money bag, the stacks of $100 bills. This photo was taken 20 minutes after the funeral service ended, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a whisper. While the body was still being lowered into the ground, Brent DeWitt was counting cash. While Maris DeWitt was receiving the warning call from Mr. Sutter, Warren DeWitt was checking the exchange rate for the Cayman Islands. Sterling tried to object. Objection! Prejudicial! Overruled, the judge said, his face hard. The timeline is factual. Harrison turned to the jury. They didn't kill him because they hated him. They killed him because they loved money more, and they documented every step of it. The final blow came during the closing of the evidentiary phase. Sterling tried one last desperate maneuver. He called a character witness, a neighbor, to testify that Harlan was indeed confused in his final months. He forgot my name once, the neighbor said nervously. He seemed out of it. On rebuttal, Harrison stood up holding a single piece of paper. Your Honor, Harrison said, we submit into evidence the log from the independent neurologist Dr. Aris in Charleston, dated 2 weeks before death. He handed the paper to the jury foreman. Read the highlighted section, please. The foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, adjusted his glasses. Patient is alert, oriented, and cognitively sharp. Scores 30 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. Patient expresses concern that family members are gaslighting him regarding his memory. The room went deadly quiet. Harlan had outsmarted them again. He had gotten a doctor to certify his sanity while they were telling everyone he was crazy. Warren put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. Celeste stopped crying. She just stared at the table, her face blank. Brent looked like he wanted to jump over the railing and strangle someone, but the 2 marshals standing behind him made sure he didn't move a muscle. The judge looked at the defense table. Mr. Sterling, do you have any evidence to contradict the medical report? No, Your Honor, Sterling whispered. The judge nodded. The evidence stands. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, they didn't look at the defendants. That is always the sign. If the jury looks at the accused, there might be mercy. If they look at the judge, the hammer is coming down. They looked at the judge. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. I sat there, feeling Tessa's hand grip my shoulder. I felt the ghost of my grandfather standing beside me. I felt the weight of the key in my pocket. Not the physical key anymore, but the metaphorical one. The key that had unlocked the truth. I looked at my parents. They were strangers. They were people I had shared a house with, shared meals with, but I didn't know them. I had never known them. I had only known the masks they wore. And now, thanks to a stack of paperwork, a hidden safe, and a voice recorder, the masks were gone. All that was left were 3 people who had traded their souls for a bank transfer that never cleared. The foreman cleared his throat to read the verdict, but I didn't need to hear the words. I had already heard the truth in the garage. This part, the prison sentences, the gavel, the handcuffs, this was just the paperwork, The trial was nearing its end, and the air in the courtroom felt brittle, like dried leaves ready to snap. The prosecution had built a fortress of evidence: the toxicology report, the digital trail, the audio confession. But the defense had one final card to play. It was a desperation move, a Hail Mary throw intended to confuse the jury just enough to create reasonable doubt. "The defense calls Nurse Alana Higgins to the stand," Sterling announced, his voice smooth and confident. A woman I did not recognize walked to the stand. She was dressed in a modest cardigan, looking every bit the compassionate caregiver. She testified that she had been a relief nurse for Harlan on weekends in March. "He was confused," she told the jury, her eyes wide and innocent. "He called me by his wife's name. He thought it was 1995. He told me he was afraid his granddaughter, Maris, was trying to force him to sign papers he did not understand. He said he was scared of her." A murmur ran through the gallery. I saw the jurors exchange glances. It was a lie, a paid-for perjury designed to paint me as the villain and invalidate the new will. If the jury believed Harlan was incompetent, then the will leaving everything to me was void, and the motive for murder vanished. Sterling looked at me with a smug smile. He thought he had won. But I had held one thing back. I nudged Harrison, the prosecutor. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small, sealed evidence bag I had taken from the safe, the one item we had not yet entered into discovery because it was technically rebuttal evidence. Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce one final piece of evidence to rebut the witness's claim of mental incompetence." He walked to the bench and handed the judge a document taken from the sealed bag. "This is a certified medical evaluation from Dr. Simon Aris, the leading neurologist in the state," Harrison said, his voice ringing out. "It is dated November 14th, the exact same day the new will was signed." Sterling froze. "Dr. Aris writes," Harrison continued, reading from the page, "Mr. DeWitt is fully oriented to time, place, and person. His cognitive functions are superior for his age. He expressed to me a specific fear that his family would attempt to label him as senile to seize control of his assets. He requested this evaluation specifically to serve as a legal shield." Harrison turned to the nurse on the stand. "Ms. Higgins, were you aware that on the days you claim Mr. DeWitt was confused, he was actually recording his own vital signs and keeping a detailed journal of the medication tampering in a cipher that requires a genius-level intellect to decode?" The nurse stammered. She looked at Warren. Warren looked at the floor. "No further questions," Harrison said. But the twists were not over. Gideon Sutter stood up. He wasn't on the witness stand, but he asked the judge for permission to address the court regarding the chain of custody of the estate. "Your Honor," Gideon said, his voice grave, "there is one final matter regarding the brass key that Ms. DeWitt found in the safe." He held up the small brass key that had started this entire journey. "Ms. DeWitt believed this key only opened the wall safe in the bedroom," Gideon said. "But Harlan DeWitt was a man of contingencies. This key has a twin, and it opens a second box, which has been in my possession for 6 months, with strict instructions to be opened only if the competency of his granddaughter was challenged in court." Gideon placed a steel lockbox on the evidence table. He used the key, my key, to open it. Inside was not money. It was a single leather-bound notebook. "This is Harlan's playbook," Gideon announced. "He wrote it last year. In it, he predicts every single move his family has made in the last week." Gideon opened the book and began to read Harlan's handwriting. "Warren will try to wire the money to the Caymans. He will use the account ending in 459. Celeste will claim she was only trying to help me with my pain. Brent will try to physically intimidate Gideon. They will hire a witness to claim I am insane." The courtroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "And finally," Gideon read, his voice catching slightly, "they will blame Maris. They will say she manipulated me. But let the record show. Maris knows nothing. I kept her in the dark to protect her. I built the trap. I baited the hook, and I waited for them to bite. Maris is not the manipulator. She is merely the one I trusted to close the door. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time in days. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me absolution. He had made sure that no one could ever say I was part of his death. He had orchestrated his own justice from beyond the grave. The jury went into deliberation at 2:00. They returned at 4:00. 2 hours. That was all it took to dismantle a lifetime of lies. We find the defendant, Warren DeWitt, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny, the foreman read. We find the defendant, Celeste DeWitt, guilty of administration of a poison and conspiracy to commit murder. We find the defendant, Brent DeWitt, guilty of assault, conspiracy, and attempted destruction of evidence. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Brent slammed his fists onto the defense table. He spun around, his face purple with rage, looking for me in the gallery. "Maris," he screamed, straining against the marshals who grabbed his arms. "You did this. You are dead. You hear me? You are nothing." They dragged him out, his boots skidding on the floor, his curses echoing in the high ceiling. Celeste didn't scream. She simply collapsed. Her legs gave out, and she slid off her chair onto the floor, a heap of expensive fabric and ruined vanity. She wept, but no one moved to comfort her. The jury looked at her with cold indifference. And Warren. My father stood slowly. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at his wife. He turned slowly and looked at me. His eyes were empty. The arrogance was gone. The calculation was gone. There was only the hollow realization that he had underestimated the two people he should have feared the most, his father and his daughter. He looked at me like I was a stranger, or perhaps like I was a mirror showing him the monster he had become. He said nothing. The marshals handcuffed him and led him away. He walked with a shuffle, an old man suddenly stripped of his power. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. He looked down at the empty defense table, then out at the gallery. "In my 20 years on the bench," the judge said, his voice stern, "I have seen crimes of passion, and I have seen crimes of desperation. But this was a crime of arithmetic. You calculated the value of a human life and decided it was worth less than a lifestyle." He paused, his eyes landing on the door where my family had just exited. "Greed is not a tragedy," the judge said. "It is a choice, and today, the bill has come due." He banged the gavel one last time. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted into noise, reporters shouting questions, people shuffling to leave. But I didn't move. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the brass key in my pocket. Tessa squeezed my hand. "It is over. Maris, you won." "No," I said softly. "I didn't win. I just survived." I stood up and walked out of the courthouse. The late afternoon sun was blinding, but the air felt clean. I was alone. I had no parents, no brother, no grandfather. I had a massive estate, a portfolio of investments, and a quiet, empty house on the ocean. But as I stood on the steps, I realized the house wouldn't be empty. It would be free. I took the key out of my pocket one last time. I looked at the jagged teeth of the metal, the thing that had opened the safe, opened the box, and opened the truth. I didn't need it anymore. I closed my fist around it, feeling the metal bite into my palm. I wasn't holding on to the past. I was holding on to the fact that for the first time in my life, the story was mine to write. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking on the concrete. Behind me, the heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung shut. Click. The sound was final, definitive. The story of the DeWitt family ended there. Not with a bang, not with a whisper, but with the sound of a lock engaging, shutting the darkness away forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this twisted tale of family secrets and justice, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can bring more dramatic revenge stories to you. See you in the next one.